But if you take him to a neurotypical therapist, I can promise you, I will even take bets that he's going to get neurotypical advice that will not take into account mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivity, and about 5 or 6 other important. Love languages. Oh, I wish you could just speak to love. Those 5 love languages, that's not even one of those is his love language. Not one. His love language is just stop pointing out what I'm doing wrong and leave me alone more. That's his love. You want to speak his love language? Give him more space without complaining about it, without interrupting his private time, and stop pointing out everything that he's doing wrong. I'm not being funny. If you wanted to speak his love language, that was it right there. I'm not saying you should. You do what you want with that. But by God, that is his love language. You say what I say to him verbatim and see what he says. Well, Mark said your love language would be these 3 things. Me letting you have decompression time without interrupting you or complaining about it, and to stop pointing out everything you're doing wrong. Is that really would be your love language? I'd be really interested in seeing what he says. You think his love language is, oh, I want you to buy me, if you buy me more gifts, I'd do better. Or if you just provide me some quality time, we would really be getting along a lot better. No.
Do you ever get tired of looking at all the negative things associated with your ASD spouse? Here are just a few of the abilities associated with ASD level 1 or Asperger's syndrome. Visual, 3-dimensional thinking. Most people on the autism spectrum are very visual in their thought processes, which lends itself to countless useful and creative applications. Logic over emotion. Although people with ASD are very emotional at times, they spend so much time computing in their minds that they get quite good at it, and they can be very logical in their approach to problem solving. Internal motivation. They're motivated internally as opposed to being motivated by praise, money, bills, or acceptance, which ensures a job done with conscience and with personal pride. Independent, unique thinking. People on the autism spectrum tend to spend a lot of time alone and will likely have developed their own unique thoughts as opposed to a herd mentality. High IQ. Many experts say that those with ASD often have a higher than average general IQ. Higher fluid intelligence. Scientists have discovered that people with ASD level 1 have a higher fluid intelligence than neurotypicals, which is the ability to find meaning in confusion and solve new problems and draw inferences and understand the relationships of various concepts independent of acquired knowledge. Focus and diligence. This is the autistic person's ability to focus on tasks for a long period of time without needing supervision or incentive. Attention to detail, sometimes with painstaking perfection. So people on the spectrum are a varied group of people who are mostly bright, funny, articulate, caring, logical, honest, and persistent, and who just happen to think and behave a bit differently.
Resentment is very common. I talk about it all the time. The antidote is forgiveness. And forgiveness is this, and this only. I'm going to stop replaying this movie in my head, or actually movies, or another way of putting it, I'm going to stop recounting these events that have been so troublesome in the past. I'm going to no longer think about my past hurts. I'm not trying to sweep them under the rug. It did hurt. I have a right to be resentful, but my resentment is only hurting me. So I'm going to let go of resentment for my benefit, not for his. I'm going to stop reminding myself of all of these past events that were so hurtful for my benefit, not his. When you start to ruminate or replay the event, which you will, you don't beat up on yourself and go, and something you might be there might have been several minutes go by when you were contemplating and ruminating, I can't believe he said this, I can't believe he did this, why do I have to live like this? And then you go, oh, wait a minute, wait. There, I did it again. I was in the rabbit hole with my negative thoughts. You don't beat up on yourself about it. You go, well, I've practiced ruminating for years, so now and it's a habit. I'm going to have to develop a new habit of practicing that as soon as a thought comes in my head, where I'm wanting to replay this movie, I'm instantly going to go, okay, wait a minute. We don't want to hash through that again because it's making me suffer. In theory, it's as easy as eating a piece of candy. But where it gets real difficult is you're going to have to catch yourself repeating the old habit and forgive yourself for doing that. Or I should say, maybe don't beat up on yourself for relapsing. And you're going to have to be real consistent and practicing. It's going to take months. So that's the hard part, is retraining my mind to catch these negative thoughts. And okay, well, there was one. I don't know what popped in my head, but I just reminded me of this thing he said yesterday or last week. And I'm not going to finish that movie. I started the movie and I used to sit there for the entire thing. Now the movie starts, I'm leaving the theater instantly. And then you distract yourself, you move on to whatever you're doing. This will happen a dozen times a day. I would ask you to stop with the thoughts of, oh, well, he can't help it. This is part of the disorder. I'd rather you have that thought than to not have that thought. But whenever you have that thought, well, it's not his fault. He has this disorder, and this is just what I'm going to have to live with. You're feeding your resentment again. Don't try to make sense of it. Just that when you would ordinarily have the thought, oh, here it goes again, but he can't help it. But wait a minute. That's playing the movie again. I'm not going to try to make sense of it. I'm not going to try to explain it away. I'm not going to try to get him off the hook and just chalk it up to, no, I'm not doing I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm out. Catch yourself thinking about him and shift. I want to validate you with what I'm getting ready to say because there's 3 or 4 things. I don't know. We'll find out the exact number, but I'm sure there's at least 3 or 4 things that have made your situation really problematic. You might identify with some of this or perhaps all of it. And I'm not faulting him. This isn't a criticism of him. This is validation of you. If you're like most of the people I work with, when you first met him, you were to some degree his special interest, and you got nurturing, perhaps, although some of the ladies goes, no, it was really not so great from the beginning, but that's the minority of cases. He kind of stepped up to the plate in the early going, and so you thought, and I am speaking in generalities here, that, hey, nice guy, maybe I'll spend my life with him. You didn't realize at the time, and maybe you're still not sure if he hasn't had an assessment, that he was, I don't like the term masking because that implies there's some deceit. What's really going on there is he wanted you to like him. But it certainly wasn't the thing you signed up for. So it's almost a moot point to toy around with different terms. He wanted you to like him. Obviously you were important to him, or he wouldn't have cared. He would just been his regular old self. So that's kind of strike number 1, that you got into something and it looked like an apple and it turned out to be a banana. And the second thing is, with this developmental disorder, it's not like bipolar, for example, where there's medication that can get this person functioning just fine, or like maybe antisocial personality disorder, where in some cases, if not most cases, those symptoms lessen with age. This is a developmental disorder, which means that there's no medication for it, and sometimes it gets worse with age. That's another problem. And then the other problem is, due to his mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, and anxiety, it's hard for him to see his role in the dysfunction, and it's even harder for him to know what he's supposed to be doing differently. So I'm validating that there was a lot of things at play that made life very difficult for you. Now, the problem is, though, you're already in it. Unless which is not my recommendation, unless you're planning for divorce, you're already in it. And so for your benefit, not so much his, although he might benefit as a nice side effect, we have to think in terms of what you can do to be taking care of you, given those cards that you have been dealt. And it's a hell of a dilemma. It really is. So I think the message here that I want you to, at least, I'm just planting a seed today. You can dismiss it if you don't think it's going to help you at all. But sometimes less work is better. If you feel like you've been doing all the relationship work, maybe it's time for you to adopt the mantra that less is better. If you, for example, one end of your house catches fire, and then you put that fire out, and then you begin the process of rebuilding that end of the house, but then for whatever reason, somebody sets fire to the other end of the house. And so now you got to put that fire out. Now you have two ends of the house that you're working on. And about the time you almost get done with the first fire, doing renovation, it catches fire again. So you're back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That may have been how you felt with him. It's like, I think that I get 4 steps forward with him only to have my hopes dashed and go 5 steps back. And then I almost have to start all over again. So I want you to think in terms of effort involves either doing something or avoiding something. On one end, you're working on doing something, which is exhaustive. And on the other end, recommending that you begin the process of avoiding something. Now, avoiding something takes a lot of discipline, like biting your tongue, for example, but it doesn't take much time or effort. Doing has exhausted you. Avoiding will be the path of least resistance, and I'm not saying avoid everything. Some things you can't avoid, and that's fine. So there's 2 categories of poor doing. Doing that yields no positive result, and then also doing that actually makes a bad problem worse. You've experienced that. So with this idea in mind, you're trying to avoid the negatives, in other words, burning one end of the house, rather than exert some course of action. I'm not faulting you, but you're lecturing, arguing, pleading, negotiating, reasoning with, trying to share feelings in hopes that he'll get it. That has been too much of a waste of time and energy that has made you, it may have even affected your mental health or even physical health. So what I'd like for you to do, if you're so inclined, you don't have to do it now, but maybe soon, within the next day or so, I'd like for you to consider listing all the things that you've been doing or saying that yield no positive result or makes a bad problem worse. And then from that list, there's going to be some things on that list that you're going to have the thought, well, I'm just not going to be able to avoid doing that because it's important and I just can't sweep it under the rug. Totally understand that. But from the list, there's going to be a bunch of things where you think, I can probably avoid saying or doing that thing, and because it's not improving the situation, and too often it's making it worse. So list the things that you've been doing or saying that yields no positive result or makes the problem worse. Then from that list, pick those things that you're willing to avoid doing or saying, not so much for his benefit. This isn't extra work for you in order to help him. What you've been doing, I'm not faulting you, way more work than this.
You probably have tried to deliver a good message, and for whatever reason your spouse on the autism spectrum either didn't fully understand you or didn't listen to you or didn't retain very well or didn't follow through very well, and so you just assumed that he simply didn't care. But what's more likely going on if he has ASD level 1 is he has difficulties with processing information, and he's also a slow processor. People on the autism spectrum have problems processing information from one or more of their 7 sensory systems, which, as you know, would be sight, balance, touch, movement, smell, taste, and hearing. Now, these processes take place at an unconscious level, and they work together with attention and learning, and each system has specific receptors that pick up information that's relayed to the brain. Now, the sensory characteristics of people on the autism spectrum are often responsible for their processing difficulties, negative behaviors, and unpleasant emotions. Now, here's the most important point. The sensory systems are also involved in what we call emotional processing. People use their emotions as a sensory system too. But with people on the autism spectrum, they tend to vary in their ability to process information emotionally, in part because at least one other sense often doesn't work well. For example, it'd be difficult for a person with auditory processing disorder to figure out whether a person's voice suggests friendliness or meanness. Also, many people on the autism spectrum have a hard time using their emotions or desires to process information and act appropriately in certain interpersonal settings. Now, processing is a system that helps the person select, prepare, and begin to interpret incoming information. People on the autism spectrum who have difficulty with processing may have a range of problems related to regulating the use of incoming information. Now, there are 5 processing skills, which include satisfaction control, focal maintenance, depth and detail of processing, cognitive activation, and saliency determination. Now, these are fancy terms, but we're going to look at each one in turn. Satisfaction control involves the person's ability to allocate enough attention to activities or topics of moderate or low levels of interest. People on the spectrum with poor satisfaction control have difficulty concentrating on activities that are not exciting enough. Focal maintenance allows the person to focus on important information for the appropriate period of time, but people on the spectrum may not concentrate long enough on some things and may concentrate too long on others. Depth and detail of processing controls how intensely the person can concentrate on highly specific data. It enables them to focus deeply enough to recognize and remember necessary details, but people on the spectrum tend to remember a lot of details that relate to their area of special interest, but may not remember much outside of that interest. Cognitive activation is a form of active processing that connects new information to what has already been learned through prior knowledge and experience. Now, people who are inactive processors are unable to connect to prior knowledge to assist their understanding of new information. And on the other hand, overactive processors are reminded of too much prior knowledge, making it difficult for them to maintain focus. So your spouse on the spectrum will tend to either be an inactive processor or an overactive processor. And lastly was saliency determination, which involves selecting which incoming information is the most important. People on the spectrum who have difficulty with this control may be distracted by things that are not relevant, and they may miss important information that you present. So how would you know for sure whether your autistic spouse has difficulty processing information? Well, here are some telltale signs. If he has difficulty in this area, he'll have difficulty distinguishing between what is important and what isn't. He may finish processing what you're saying before you've finished expressing your ideas. He may focus for too brief of a period, or he may focus for too long of a period. He may focus too superficially or too deeply on information presented. He may have an idea of what he wants to say in his mind, but when he attempts to share the idea with you, it doesn't come out right. He may have difficulty connecting new information with information already known. He may have problems shifting focus from one subject or activity to another. He will often have trouble picking up the main idea in conversations with you, and he may have to repeat himself several times before you understand what he's saying. He may miss a lot of things that are obvious to you, the NT wife, and he may only pay attention to exciting information or highly stimulating activities. Also, you may find that he will process one word that you're saying, but then thinks of something completely unrelated to what you're saying. He may process too little or too much information, and he may try to understand the meaning of each word that you say to him rather than being able to automatically understand the whole gist and general meaning of the sentence that you deliver. So, before you jump to the conclusion that he doesn't listen, doesn't understand, doesn't retain, and doesn't follow through because he just doesn't care, just remember this little conversation we had here about difficulties with processing information in the autistic brain.